with the announcement at the G20 of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, the end of the corridor, Europe, if you look at a map, it's very interesting. It will end at the port of Piraeus in Greece, and that is one of the biggest and most important flagship projects of China's Belt and Road Initiative. It was built by China, and that's where this corridor would supposedly end, if anything gets built at all. Which I am with you, Alexander. I don't think India has any high hopes for this, and I don't think really any country has high hopes for how significant that announcement is. But maybe for like a final comment on this, guys, on this multipolar world development, we haven't spoken since the BRICS expansion. Now I think Bashar al-Assad is in China, having high-level meetings there. It just seems like as the Ukraine conflict goes on longer and longer, and even as the United States tap dances and tiptoes around a conflict with China, and of course tries to push Russia into more dangerous escalations, it seems like this world order that it has constructed along with its European allies or vassals, however you want to see them, is falling apart.
Well, it is falling apart because, I mean, going back to what Alex was saying about the way in which Europe is deindustrializing and the collapse of the slow motion economic collapse of Europe, and the role that the United States has played in that. Of course, again, many countries around the world can see this, and what they see and what they understand is that the United States has turned predatory towards its own allies. So why would people want to become allied to a country that does that to its own allies? Once upon a time, when the United States was a very different place from the place it's become today, in the 1950s and the 1960s, the United States worked to build up its allies in Europe. It played a major role in reconstructing Europe after the Second World War, because it saw that as a way of making America itself stronger. It had strong allies. It was the strongest country and it had strong allies. Now it's a less strong country and it wants weaker allies. And it is not a good impression to convey around the world. Now, I'm going to say this. I think the biggest single diplomatic event of the last year, this year, has actually been the BRICS summit meeting. And the key thing was that in the run-up to it, there was lots of hopes in the West that India and China would somehow clash and that things wouldn't work out, and that the Indians and the Chinese would somehow cancel themselves out at the BRICS summit and that we wouldn't see very much happen. It turned out otherwise. The Indians and the Chinese clearly have issues with each other, and they manifestly do. But they're clearly also both very interested in developing the BRICS. And critically, they work together. They work together to expand the BRICS. They work together also to build up BRICS's financial architecture and BRICS's new trading system. And in some respects, by the way, India benefits from that even more than China does, because India is an importer, unlike China. Its currency is even more tightly controlled, much more tightly controlled than the Chinese currency is. It's even more difficult to take rupees out of India and use them than it is to take RMB out of China, for example. So the Indians went along. They didn't go along. They were part of the team. And we saw the same thing happen, and this is critically important, at the G20. Now, India chaired the G20 meeting, and they made sure, firstly, that Zelensky, we've discussed how unpopular he is with world leaders, they made it clear they did not want Zelensky there. And again, they worked with the Chinese to make sure that the final statement that came out of the G20 reflected, as the Financial Times put it, Chinese talking points. So on Ukraine, this is the one that got the most attention. I mean, the G20 statement really was so neutral that it was actually more pro-Russian than anything. But on all sorts of other things, on multipolarity, on creating a more democratic balance around the world, the G20 summit meeting that the Indians shared reflected very much the BRICS agenda. And there's two things to say. The Indians were able to do that because they were able to leverage the effect of the BRICS summit in Johannesburg before, so that when the Americans and the Western powers were unhappy, well, they couldn't just let the G20 collapse, because at that point, so many other countries would just have drifted even further towards the BRICS. So the BRICS is now a rival to the G20, but it is having an effect on the G20. It is making the G20 start to follow increasingly a BRICS agenda. So the Indians used that very skillfully. And of course, the result was that India and China worked together. Now, there was a lot of tension before the summit about the fact that Xi Jinping didn't turn up in Delhi. I have no doubt at all that that was agreed by the Chinese and the Indians in advance. Modi and Xi Jinping had a very good meeting during the BRICS summit in Johannesburg. The reason Xi Jinping didn't come to Delhi, and I've said this many times, is because he didn't want to meet Joe Biden there. He didn't want to be maneuvered into a meeting with Joe Biden at a time like this, when the United States wants everybody to think that the relations between China and the United States are good when they are actually bad. And that was why he stayed away. And by staying away, he actually made it easier for the Chinese, working with the Indians, working with Modi. They made it easier for Modi specifically to shape the G20 very much in the sort of BRICS China direction. It's very skillfully executed, very clever, intelligent diplomacy, and it should bury this idea that India and China are adversaries. They are countries, big countries, with major problems. They have many things that they need to sort out with each other, but both ultimately have the same strategic endpoint, which is a multipolar system.
Alex, any last words on multipolarity?
Yeah, it's just such a mismatch. I'm listening to what Alexander's saying, and that's the word that comes to my mind. It's a mismatch. On a diplomacy level, it's the China, India, Russia, Lavrov. They're going up against who? Baerbock, Blinken, Sullivan, Biden. Really? I mean, it really is a mismatch. And I remember when Biden got elected with the 81 million votes, and everyone on CNN and MSNBC, they were so excited because now the adults are back in the White House. Now we've got a foreign policy guru, a master in Biden. He's going to take over, and he's going to make everything right in the world. It has been a freaking disaster, a train wreck of a foreign policy from the Biden White House. Biden should have stayed away from Ukraine. He is knee deep in all kinds of stuff with Ukraine. Who in God's name advised or pushed Biden, the Biden White House, to go full speed into Ukraine? I don't know who, but boy, that person, I hope that person has been fired, because that was the worst foreign policy decision ever in the history of foreign policy decisions that I remember from a president. This has been the worst one. They've destroyed Ukraine. They went in there to destroy Russia. Let's not forget what the main purpose was to destroy Russia. Destroy Russia, regime change of Putin, get into Russia, balkanize it, and then everyone can just rush into what is now a broken up Russia, and they can just take anything they want. They can take the gas, they can take the oil, they can take the minerals, the diamonds, everything, and everyone was going to be happy, right? That's what they thought was going to happen. They made a mess of it. Russia is now better off. Russia and China are stronger. BRICS is stronger. Ukraine's a wreck. Germany's a wreck. Europe is a wreck. And Biden now is involved in all kinds of scandals that now people are openly talking about. And where do all of Biden's troubles come from? His dealings with Ukraine back in 2014, 2015 with Obama and the coup that they made happen there. Biden should have stayed away from Ukraine. He should have never talked about it, mentioned it. He should have just called up whoever was president, Zelensky, whoever, and just said, look, do whatever Russia tells you to do. I'm out. I don't want anything to do with Ukraine. Don't talk to me about Ukraine. I got what I wanted with the coup. Hunter got what he wanted, what he needed. We're all good. That should have been their policy. Instead, they destroyed everything. BRICS is strong. Everyone's talking about BRICS. BRICS is the game in town. Let's be honest. No one talks about the G7 or G20. Who cares about the G7 or G20? No one cares.
They came and went really fast,
Yeah,
especially
no
the
one cares.
G20 came and went.
You have Iran and Saudi Arabia in the same organization. Same organization.
Yeah.
This has been a foreign policy disaster of epic proportions. And it all started because they thought that they could get regime change in Russia and destroy Russia. That's what they thought. Whoever put this idea out there in the beginning of the Biden administration and said, this is my master plan, let's do it, and everyone agreed to it. One day I hope to find out.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who do you think is the mastermind behind all of this, Alexander and Danny? I mean, I have no idea, but wow, what a mistake they made.
I don't know who it was. I mean, most probably someone connected with the Nuland Kagan family, I would guess. But they're the people who come up with a lot of these ideas. But I suspect that this was talked about and discussed and thought through over many, many years within this tiny group of people who, of course, weren't listening or getting proper expert advice from real experts. By the way, you said that, Biden, was a shambles. He was a big shambles in Vietnam as well, by the way. I mean, this is the pivotal place that we're going to win over against the Chinese. So he goes to Hanoi, and they have to take him away from the press conference because the press conference was an absolute disaster. So you want to project American confidence and American strength. Well, I mean, I think that even a lot of his supporters within the political establishment, I think that press conference in Hanoi would have been a major, a moment when a lot of them said to themselves, well, this can't go on like this. This is an impossible situation. I agree with what you say. We are completely outmatched in diplomacy by people who are highly trained and understand this very well. The Chinese are good at it. The Russians are good at it. The Indians are good at it. The West, unfortunately, is not. If the best we can put up is Annalena Baerbock and Joe Biden and Blinken, then, it's game over, frankly.
Yes, and maybe one final comment. Sorry to keep you over, but this is where the discussion gets really fun. The embarrassment too. Like I think with Nuland, Kagan, there's so many of these elites and the neocons that are kind of doing their bidding. Like they have just piled up embarrassments under Biden. I mean, you mentioned in passing, Alexander, these kind of like maybe odd meetings in terms of the times with DPRK, Russia, China. I mean, there's been 2 high-level meetings at anniversaries for the DPRK, for North Korea, that have occurred. Then you have the Huawei Mate 60 Pro coming out, all made in China, semiconductors, everything, meaning that sanctions have failed. And then Putin, has come out recently saying, well, the sanctions have failed on us too, and we're going to grow at a pretty significant pace, 2 to 3% over the next couple of years, which, given Russia's position, facing thousands of sanctions, that is on par, if not surpasses, many of the European countries, and is on par with how the United States generally grows sanctions free. So
Well, it's
I mean, the
faster than the
embarrassment
United.
after embarrassment after embarrassment, it feels like
Absolutely.
for Biden, for the neocons, and just any final comment on that
Well,
because it
just
just
briefly, I mean, it is faster than the United States. I mean, 2 to 3% growth is faster than the United States. I mean, we're hearing in Europe all the time about the strong US economy. The strong US Biden economy is going to manage about 1.8% growth this year, which is, it's growth, but it's hardly scorching growth. And this despite the fact that the Biden administration is running an 8% of GDP deficit. It's a huge budget deficit, which it is running. It is spending heroically, and it's producing very limited growth as a result. So there's something, by the way, wrong there as well. But Russia's growth is obviously is looks like it's going to be faster than that. Russia's growth, well, we're not even going to compare it with Europe because in Europe we're not growing, we're contracting and likely to continue to do so for some time. But the important thing about the sanctions is that Russia's growth going forward after the sanctions looks like it's going to be higher than it was before the sanctions. That's the real thing to really sort of get one's mind around. And the effect of the sanctions is it's galvanized the Russian economy and pushed it forward. We've seen this already happen. I mean, before 2014, Russia imported foods. They started imposing sanctions on Russia then. And the result was very rapidly, the agricultural system responded. And now it's the world's biggest food exporter. So you can see how the sanctions are working in a completely contradictory way to the way the West expected in terms of Russia. And it was China. I mean, the other big news actually this year, I talked about the BRICS summit. Of course, the war in Ukraine remains very big news. But the other big news is, in my opinion, the Huawei chip. Not because I had any doubt that China could produce these kind of chips. I mean, anybody who really thinks that China is incapable of producing advanced chips is a complete ignoramus about China. But because the revelation that most of the American political and intelligence class are ignoramuses about China. They apparently didn't realize that the Chinese would be able to do this and would be able to do this so fast. It shows, once again, the incredible lack of good intelligence, good information, good data processing and analysis that takes place in the United States, that they underestimated China so completely on this key thing.
China can't build chips. Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country, and the big counteroffensive is going to reach the Sea of Azov in 5 days because the Russians are going to run away at the first sight of the Ukraine military. They buy into all of their propaganda. I mean, they really do buy into all of their own propaganda. They create the propaganda, and then they end up believing and internalizing their own propaganda. And they build policy on top of this propaganda that they've internalized. And it just keeps on going,
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.